I'm working on it, baby. And we had the pleasure of meeting this man in Huntsville, Alabama. He came down and helped us out down there, and it was incredibly funny because he's a giver, yes. And you probably know him best from the Green Room with Paul Provenza and his work with Penn Jillette on The Aristocrats. Very funny man. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome comedian Paul Provenza!
Wow, I didn't know we were supposed to get ready to rumble. That's what I was thinking when Edwin Kagan was speaking, and he talked about how, if it crosses over from verbal abuse to physical, watch out. And I was like, let's go kick some fucking ass. Come on. I've been waiting for this. I thought that would be cool. Thank you for having me here once again. And if I could just take a moment to, Blair mentioned Penn Jillette, and in contexts like this, I feel it's very important that I want to say thank you to Penn Jillette for introducing me to so many of the people involved in this community and doing this activism. It was through Penn that I made all kinds of new friends and found out that I was far from alone, and that there were a lot of people who were as frustrated with things as I am. So thank you for opening your arms and taking me in. I appreciate that. Boy, some of the speakers here have been amazing. I'm in love with Edwin Kagan. Where is he? Is he here? I love that guy. Seriously, it's been very exciting for me. I'm here today to do some readings from Sataristas, which is a book that I did with brilliant portrait photographer Dan Dion, in which we focused on comedians who work in a satirical, subversive, or transgressive, socially critical way. That's not all comedians, but it's the ones that interested us the most. And if I may just read a little bit from the introduction, just to let you know why we felt like it might be worth hearing what these people have to say. So here we go. Number one, mustache brother, Par Parley is taken away. He is in the slammer. He up the river. He in the clink. He a jailbird. That's how Lou Mao starts the Mustache Brothers shows now. 5 members of the Burmese Special Branch showed up at Paul Parley's house one day, and they let him away because he told a joke. He said in the past, thieves were called thieves. Now they're called government workers. For that, they gave Paul Parley 7 years in prison, hard labor. Walid Hassan was famous for his comedy series on Iraqi television. He mocked coalition forces and insurgents, poked fun at pure security, long gas lines, blackouts, and the chaos of Iraqi government since the US-led invasion. For that, someone gave Walid Hassan a bullet through the head at a stoplight. Stephen Colbert performed at a black tie dinner in Washington, D.C. before America's press, media, 5-star generals, senators, congressmen, members of the Supreme Court, and the most powerful government leader in the entire world. To the media, he said, Fox News gives you both sides of every story, the president's side and the vice president's side. And he said, over the past 5 years, you journalists were so good about tax cuts, about WMD intelligence, about the effects of global warming. We Americans didn't want to know, and you had the courtesy not to try to find out. Mere feet away from the president, he said, you always know where this president stands. He believes the exact same thing on Wednesday that he believed on Monday, no matter what the hell happens on Tuesday. For that, they gave Stephen Colbert a big, fat paycheck, round-trip, first-class airfare in a limo. That's the kind of country America is. There will always be, and always have been, people who object and try to silence it, and people who write letters of complaint, boycott advertisers' products, cancel magazine and newspaper subscriptions over it. But overwhelmingly, America loves to criticize itself. If a nation can be said to have a DNA, that fact is in Americans. Our founding fathers impregnated this country with it, and it doesn't take a paternity test to prove it. It's no secret that one of the architects of both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States of America, Benjamin Franklin himself, was, in fact, a satirist. And a damn good one, too. He created lots of biting satire and confrontational humor about the things he felt needed a good going over in this country, and he printed up his own pamphlets loaded with the stuff, because newspapers couldn't be bothered. Yes, even back then, on these still blistered heels of founding a new nation and great experiment in freedom and self-government, a lot of the press was pretty content to just leave well enough alone and avoid controversy. But to criticize America is to love it. It's part of the eternal vigilance that freedom demands. To criticize America is as American as apple pie purchased at Walmart that you really shouldn't eat because you're looking like you could really stand to lose a few pounds there, my fellow American. Oh, you'd never know it from the shrill din of so many self-righteous moralists, religious charlatans, loudmouth pundits, and opportunistic, power-hungry politicians, but there was a time when it was taken for granted that criticizing America and what's wrong with it was the most patriotic thing a person could do, short of taking to arms and overthrowing an oppressive imperialistic government that violates the civil rights of its people. I'm just saying. Now, I know that, oh, here we go. Why, you may ask, should we be interested in what a bunch of comedians have to say about anything? They're comedians. Why should we take what they have to say seriously? Well, first of all, to a person, everyone in this book is brilliant. They just are. To be honest, most comedians are smarter than the average bear. That's just a fact. They have to be or they can't be doing comedy. In comedy, you have to be at least a notch or two above your audience, and the audience is the average American. I rest my case. Artful comedians see the absurdity in everything, everywhere, all the time. They can't help it. It's a curse. And when you see enough of that, you start to get pretty damn skeptical about things. So they're thinkers. And a lot of them only work nights so their days are free. That's a dangerous combination. A tendency to think and a time to do it. And to read. They read a lot. They have to write material all the time, and a lot of information has to keep going in for the good jokes to keep coming out. I guarantee you that most of the people in this book read a lot more than you do, and you're reading this, so I know you're someone who reads. Now, I also know that all of the above would immediately disqualify someone from holding elected official in this country because it's elitist. And this country feels that the most important quality for leading the most powerful military in history is that the leader is someone they can sit and have a beer with and relate to. Call me crazy. I prefer whoever's running things to be way the fuck out of my league. I prefer if they relate more to the president of China than to me, but apparently I'm not a core voter for anybody. But guess what? You can sit and have a beer with anybody in this book. Except the ones who've been through rehab, but that's okay, they'll just have a soda or something. They're not power brokers, they're not politicians, they're regular people. Yes, some of them are rich, very rich, but they got rich because America loved their comedy and guess what? Related to them. So please, do not let their intelligence, or the fact that they're well-read, and that they think a lot, stop you from listening to what they have to say. Try and look past all that. Comedians might just know more about the cross-section of the American people and what's going on the ground, as they say, than anyone else possibly could. Because in order to survive, they must have an instinct and an understanding of all varieties of Americans. In order to make people laugh in groups, in unison, you have to know what they think and why they think it all the time. A joke works because it's a surprise. You have to know what they expect and what they don't before you can surprise them with the unexpected. You've got to know what the perceived truth is before you can subvert it. You have to have a feel for what they believe, why they believe it, and what they don't believe before you can question their beliefs. You can't do your job as a comedian if you don't know all of that every single time you get up on a stage. A comedian spends his or her entire career learning about every conceivable way that someone in their audience might be looking at the world. They develop an instinct for that kind of thing, and they know more about the tenor of this country than any president or pundit ever will. And I will make this statement with 100% certainty. Not one single person who is in charge of any government, military, religious, or pseudo-religious organization in any power structure whatsoever, not one in the entire world, has the courage to get up on stage every night to learn as much about humankind as the people in this book understand intuitively. Now that's a big statement, I know, and I stand by it. Because to really learn what comedians intuitively and instinctively understand about people, you have to be truthful with them yourself. Audiences may not know that it matters to them, but we know it does. The laughs just simply aren't as big when we're faking it. And believe me, we pay close attention to the laughs. When the heart isn't there, when the fearlessness that comes from honesty isn't there, when you don't really believe what you're saying yourself, the audience simply isn't falling for it. It's a little frustrating, frankly, that we can't get any damn slack on that. But it's a frightening truth that half of this country will accept a lie that sends their loved ones to war quicker than they'll take insincerity from a comedian. Comedians who work artfully, which includes all of those in this book, are held to a higher standard when it comes to being real. You have to say what you truly believe, you have to be able to be as wrong as you are right, and you have to be honest about what you feel and who you are. Night after night, with stranger after stranger, until you learn enough about each and every one of them to make them all laugh together at precisely the moment you want them to. There is simply not a public opinion poll in the world with such a small margin of error or as great a degree of accuracy. Well, that's the basis of it. I'm going to jump. No. That's just the premise here. A little bit off point, but I mean for this particular convention. But one of the things that I asked all the participants in this book is, do you think that comedy can teach or enlighten? And I was struck again by Mr. Kagan's mention yesterday. Someone asked a question about mockery. And he talked very much about the power of mockery. And in fact, there was an article in the New York Times several days ago about how the unrest in the Middle East, which has been global upheaval, really was incited by a great deal of mockery. So it's particularly pertinent, I think. So I said to Lewis Black, do you think comedy can teach or enlighten? And he said, absolutely. I do a joke that demonstrates this very fact. I read an article where this woman almost bites off her husband's penis while he's cooking pancakes. She's blowing him, I presume. He accidentally spills burning oil down her back. She bites down on his penis, and he brings the frying pan down hard on her head. I believe this story should be in a physics textbook and given to 10-year-olds. I know we have a real fear of sex in this country, but I guarantee you, you read that story to a 10-year-old and they'll never forget that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So there you go, Provence, comedy can teach. One of the things that many of the comedians in this book talk about is religion. And not all of them are atheists, though many are. But they all agree that religion is out of control. And they also all agree that nobody but a comedian is in the position right now in any sort of public format to be honest and truthful about it. They're not politicians, they're not journalists, they don't have to answer to anybody. If they offend anybody, fuck it, they don't come to the next show. So you get a lot of truth from them, in a lot of ways. Dave Attell, any Dave Attell fans here? Green Room Season 2, you won't believe it. If everybody acted as prim and proper in their real lives as they do when they come to see me, then we live in this fucking fantasy world of do-goodism everywhere. Everything would be just great and Jesus on earth perfect. But you know what? They've been taught not to laugh at certain things. And so they can't hear the truths in any of them. I have a joke about abortion, which I think is a different take from anyone else's abortion joke, by the way. I say, ladies, they could take away from you your right to have a safe, legal abortion at any moment in this country. But remember this. They can never take away your right to get drunk and throw yourself down a flight of stairs. Try as they may, no one can arrest gravity, ladies. Of course, that joke gets big groans. But you look out in the crowd and it's like girls in their 20s, groaning. If this was 1974, those very same girls would be picketing Washington singing the theme from Maude to keep their right to a fucking abortion. And it's not that they're really religious, any of them. It's that they've just been taught that abortion is something they shouldn't laugh about no matter what. But I say, if you say it through a hilarious puppet, people will get it. Because ventriloquism is the best way to get bad news. People think comedy is not important, but let me tell you something. If you go see a comedy show, and at some point after that show you are molested by a priest, well then you just weren't listening. Because priests are boy fuckers. Every comic has a joke about about it. So you can't go, how did this happen? Oh, right, I remember. The comics were all saying how the priest fucked a bunch of kids. Right, I remember that. People, come on. Does it have to be a fucking ringtone before anybody takes it seriously? Well, this would be a nice flow here, actually. Liz Winstead. Anybody familiar with Liz Winstead? Brilliant, brilliant woman. She was one of the creators of The Daily Show. And a terrific, terrific comedian. She's not as well known for her stand-up as she is for her work in radio and television, but boy, she's great. And I mean fearless. She said, I was always interested in why powerful entities did what they did. I never liked babysitting as a young girl. I loved Barbie because she didn't have any kids. She had a house, a boyfriend, a car, cool clothes, and she was fucking awesome. It was the opposite of feminist thinking, where they see Barbie as this oppressed woman with a fucked up body, but whatever. So even when it came to making money as a kid, little spending money, when I was 12 years old, my mom wouldn't let me have a paper route because it was too dangerous for a little girl to be out in the Minnesota early morning. It's dark until whenever, and there's wolves. So I thought, altar boy. That's good, that's easy enough. I thought it was a job where you could make a little bit of money. But the priest said, you can't be an altar boy, you're a girl. It's called altar boy. Now that sounded easily fixable to me. Just start calling them altar kids or whatever. So I started a petition. I went to the archdiocese. I started a whole thing. My mother was completely mortified. But I simply could not understand why the boys who ate their boogers got to stand on the altar. And then the first time I ever had sex in high school, I got pregnant. The very first time. I knew I wasn't having a baby, but the way to get an abortion was so insane. Being brought up Catholic, I didn't know where to go. But one day I saw a sign on a bus that said, abortion options. I thought, oh, there are many options. So I go to this place. It turns out it was run by some group called the Lambs of Christ. This woman comes out wearing a lab coat, and I'm thinking she must be some kind of doctor. And then I realize the women at the Clinique counter also wear lab coats. You can pretty much get a lab coat anywhere. She shows me blow-ups of mangled fetuses and a picture of a kid on a bike. I'm like, a bike? A kid on a bike? This was insane. I left completely confused. And as I was walking out the door, she was yelling after me, just remember, the choice you make is mommy or murder. I thought, I'm 16 years old, and here's an adult, a person of God, impersonating a physician, scaring the shit out of me. Even as a kid, I was like, that is fucking weird. So from that point forward, I just thought there's something really wrong here. I couldn't wrap my head around it, so my activism grew out of self-interest more than anything else. And those events propelled me into looking to other stuff. And I said, do you think your work makes a difference? She said, I think it does. If you can unsettle someone who may think they're going to disagree with you, if all of a sudden they're laughing at something you say, you've found a common ground in some weird way. It's a great way to say, look, we're laughing at something together. Maybe there's something here we can talk about in a real way, too. But it's pretty hard to change dogmatic ideologues. I'm not necessarily ever going to agree with people who are anti-choice or believe war is right. And that's why I like telling personal stories. I'm not afraid to tell my abortion story on stage because people cannot argue with my experience. No one can say, you didn't have that experience. You don't know what you're talking about. I fucking did, and I fucking do. Eddie Ift, very funny, interesting, dark, young comic. And he was talking about how sometimes you do material because you think it's funny and you think it's kind of an absurd connection, but it turns out to be a pretty goddamn good idea. He says, I do a joke where I say that America should not have sent more troops to Afghanistan and should in the future, because you cannot rebuild a country with military force. The only way you can really rebuild a country is with the Olympics. The Olympics bring in parades, Ferris wheels, pizza shops, bottled water, toilets. It's a boon to any economy, and all kind of stuff gets built real fucking quick whenever the Olympics are involved. I also like to point out that another good way to rebuild is with a good gay population. Because anytime a gay population moves into any neighborhood, they queer eye for the straight guy, everything in sight. Real estate values go through the roof. So what's the whole situation to the Afghan? What's the whole solution to the Afghan situation? The gay Olympics. Oh, let me find you. I think you need to hear this one. This is Lily Tomlin. Yeah, we don't hear enough from Lily. I was very excited to speak to Lily. Now, Lily was born fundamentalist Baptist. Lily had to go and what's it called? I think it's in here right now. I so often meet born-again people who think God singled them out. Like if they survived an accident, God particularly saved them because they were Christians. That God has something in mind for them to do. Their work here is not finished in the parlance of that subculture, which is really a major culture, not so sub. There seems to be a real arrogance in all of that to me. Until I was about 10 years old and had any consciousness about it at all, I lived in terror that I would not be saved before I died. The preacher would call for people to come forward. You go to the front of the church where there were people for you to confess your sins to and accept Christ as your Savior and get saved. The adults all just acted out of control, weeping and wailing, beating their breasts, carrying on, and I just thought, this is so absolutely embarrassing. I said, I will never be able to do that. It didn't feel genuine. I couldn't transcend that. I knew if I did, I'd just be playing a part. But it puts a lot of terror in a kid's heart. Every time you'd step out of the church after services, somebody'd say something like, ooh, the sky looks funny. End of the world could be coming. And you'd think, holy mackerel, if I don't get another chance to go forward till next Sunday, what if the end of the world comes before that? For a 7- or 8-year-old to be thinking this all the time is a bit oppressive. What opened my eyes was Faye Mathis, a girl I knew in grade school. Her parents were a bit intellectual and happened to be Jewish as well, so they had a whole nother perspective on all of this. And one day Faye said to me, do you think God made man, or did man make God? Well, that had never even occurred to me. And just the mere question was so revelatory, I just never worried about it again. And I said, well, you went on to lead a life that is completely antithetical by fundamentalist standards. She said, you mean because I'm gay? I said, no, because you're in show business. And also gay. She said, well, that is true, but, you know, that really doesn't seem to be too much of a factor. So maybe the older relatives were more shocked or dismayed about my being gay, but you know what? Fame supersedes everything. They excused me because I was famous and I could get them tickets to see Leno. I said, when you became a star in the 70s, it was very risky to be out, and you handled it in such a way that was very fearless and honest. And I particularly remember a moment on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson that to me was so bold and a real lesson about what a real comedian is. She said, you mean when he asked me about not having children? Well, it was very much of that time. You don't want to have children was something they could broach in public rather than whether or not you were gay. So I remember Johnny asked me, you're not married, are you? And I said, no, I'm not. And he said, don't you ever want to have children? And I said, you mean biologically bear children? No, I don't have any desire to do that. Now remember, this was 1973. The audience stopped dead. They went totally silent. Even just that short time ago, relatively speaking, for a female to say in public that she didn't want to be a mother was divisive. It's hard to believe, but it was a very strong thing to say publicly at the time. It was, well, what's wrong with you that you don't want to be a mother? It was un-American, you know? And I could feel a huge amount of tension. So just as a joke, really, just to break the tension, I said to Johnny, well, who has custody of yours? I said, pretty ballsy line. Especially since Johnny was notoriously tetchy about anything to do with his personal life. And she said, well, you know what, it didn't even seem ballsy to me. It was just kind of the truth. I mean, who did have custody of his kids? I'm sure he didn't have to expend too much effort raising them. That's often how it is. I'm sure I wasn't aware of or intending to make any kind of powerful statement. I was just telling the truth in the moment, trying to get a little laugh. Love Lily Tom. Let me see. It's slightly off topic, but because I mentioned it before and I love him so dearly, I'm going to read you Penn Jillette. How many of you here know Penn? Well, he figured himself out real good. He was, wait, where is it? Oh, here we go. This kills me. We were talking about comedy and satire and what it means and does it have any effect. And he was talking about how, he said Lenny Bruce being funny was completely unimportant to me. Abby Hoffman being funny, totally unimportant. There was a much higher calling to that in what they were doing. But you have to remember that this is something my wife has to tell people often. She'll say, I love my husband, but you gotta understand, he takes everything really seriously. I was complaining that my 3-year-old daughter was being thrown into this whole princess culture. I watched a little bit of Aladdin with her, and there's all this stuff about being a princess. All her friends have these princess games and princess days. She has this Disney game where she moves these little princess puppets around the board. And I said to her, you are not my little princess. You're not daddy's royally born, with no egalitarian spirit, able to keep down other people because of ancestry and birth. You're daddy's little freedom fighter. You are an individual, and you will accomplish in life what you want to accomplish. Your friends, they're their daddy's little princesses. You are daddy's little freedom fighter. If you want to dress up like Betsy Ross. Dress up like Susan B. Anthony. And I started saying things like, Lady Di, she was an evil whore. Why did anybody like her? She's a symbol of everything bad. Susan B. Anthony, women's rights, atheist, abolitionist, everything Susan B. Anthony did was right. Dress up like her. Madame Curie, there are female heroes that you can dress up. Don't do the princess thing. And my sister-in-law looked at me and said, you know, Penn, I don't think it's meant that seriously. I think it has more to do with playing dress up and the nice pretty gowns. I really don't think she's thinking all that much about keeping down the proletariat. Any Doug Stanhope fans amongst you? If you're not familiar with Doug, highly recommend it. Doug is rather controversial. Everybody but us, brother. I had a whole fucking problem a few nights ago over mentioning ecstasy in a positive light. It's like the tamest thing you could pick out of my set. But that's the thing some girl went into histrionics over because my sister died from one hit and anyone can die. You can flack over anything and everything. If I just did dick jokes, they get mad because I said titty fuck or whatever. Everyone will find a reason to get mad at anything if they want to. And it's all the same. At one gig recently, this Christian group sat through all this kick-fucking a girl with cerebral palsy jokes. And every other horrible, disgusting, vile thing in my act. And then I got to some Jesus stuff. And as a group, they all marched out, making a big show of getting upset. Now, you have to remember, it says right on the bill, right on the entrance of the place, XXX rated. Which I didn't put there. But it's the only buzzword the managers could think of to keep the weak out. So really what was going on was, oh, I see, this isn't the XXX rated stuff your Christian group was looking for. You can't talk logic with those people. They need their Jesus. If your life was working in a chain factory outside Carbondale, Illinois, with the bleak fucking winters, and you married the girl you got pregnant when she was 16 because that's what you were told you're supposed to do, and now you're 35, you're not going to start second-guessing every one of those beliefs. It would destroy everything your whole life's been about. You need that Jesus. You need that structure and all those family values just to get through the fucking day. You're not going to go, you know, I've lived my whole life wrong. Fuck my wife and kids. I'm going to learn ballet like I always wanted. I assume that most of that comes from fear and belonging. People join churches the same way other people join gangs, just to belong to something. Things like religion work because people are hopeless and they want to believe in something. They don't want to end up like me, sitting in a fucking basement with you all day long. Anybody here familiar with Rick Shapiro? Yeah? Oh, excellent. surprised to hear that. Rick Shapiro is a one of a kind. Very interesting history. He was, at one point, he was a junkie, and institutionalized many times, lived on the streets, and was turning tricks for a while. And he said, something happened to me when I was a hustler. This big, rich, powerful guy used to call me all the time. And I'd put on straight porno to get me hard, and then he would blow me. And one time, when he dropped to his knees, right behind where he had been standing, I saw a picture of his son in military school and his wife and a nun. I saw what to me was just a big lie. And the guy would actually say things to me like, you're such an energetic kid, you gotta get your life together. And I'd go, yeah, you're the guy I should listen to about straightening out my fucking life. Terry Jones, Monty Python. And I said, he was talking about how Monty Python, Life of Brian, which I think is an absolute masterpiece of satire, one of the all-time great satires about religion. He was saying that they really didn't intend it to be controversial, that they actually thought that they were being respectful. Because in the movie, they really take no issue with Jesus, but they take issue with everybody who does what they want to do and turn it into their own thing. So I said, even though you say you intended to be not at all political, the film ended up being banned in some places. And he said, well, the bans were religious rather than political. But then again, you know, the more I look at history, the more I realize that religion is politics. He said, Ireland banned Life of Brian, Meaning of Life, and another film I had made about a prostitute called Personal Services. In the entire history of Ireland, they'd only banned 4 films, and I had made 3 of them. And I thought, well, you can't really do much better than that. But certainly when we made Life of Brian, it was with an intent to be somewhat controversial, but, aware that it would be somewhat controversial. That it came about when I was editing something else, and the others were off doing a publicity jaunt for Holy Grail, and they were talking about doing another movie. And Eric said, why don't we do something about Christ? And someone came up with the title, Jesus Christ, Lust for Glory. And we all thought, ooh, that's very naughty. So we thought we would just do a funny version of the life of Christ. But then we all read the Gospels again, which we hadn't done, I suppose, since we were tiny children. And when we all realized that what Christ says in the Gospels were actually great things. The humor wasn't there. That's not where it was. It's not in any of that. The humor is in how people interpret it. Christ talks about peace and love. 2,000 years later, people are torturing and killing each other because they can't agree on how he said it. Or which hat you should wear when you say it. How you should dress, what services you should have. Reading about medieval history and the history of the church, I realized that religion is power. Religion gives people power. All the quarrels in the church are about political power. The squabbles over the Eucharist were purely about who was going to run what bit of the church and have what bit of the power. A king in Romania worked very closely with a prophet called Zalmoxis. And a Greek historian actually records that when the king used Zalmoxis' name in pronouncements, people listened and obeyed more. That was 500 BC, and people were using religion to gain control even then. And then I said, well, I'm particularly interested in that film because so much of current life in America is pervaded by religion. And I know that the UK is pretty much a secular country. He said, well, America is meant to be a secular country. It was set up as a secular country by your very own founding fathers. I said, well, then you know how infuriating it is that people argue it was established as a Christian nation and that religion's become such a powerful political force. And I said, religion was a well you drew from again and again. Was an atheist statement your intent? And he said, I don't think any of us were particularly interested in making an atheist statement or saying this is all nonsense. It's like exposing the nonsense in any sort of authority, really. At the time we made it in 1978, religion was on its uppers in England anyway. Nobody was going to church. I actually thought it was a little unfair on religion to be kicking it when it was down. What that movie really is about for us is the abuse of power more than anybody believing nonsense. So I went through school being non-political, with a plague on both your houses attitude, and it was actually doing history research on Chaucer in the Middle Ages that made me realize that you could see the same people seeking power then, using the same methods to gain power then, and the same methods to keep power as now. That opened my eyes a lot to what was going on nowadays. I don't think we really change as animals, as the human beings. If you read what Aristotle wrote in 600 BC, he talks about the same things we talk about now, and he identified the exact same problems. And religion's always been there. I had an interesting conversation. This brings up something, a lot of talk here in a lot of these conferences I've been to about communicating atheism, about how do we present ourselves, about how radical do we be, how off-putting can we be, or you're also angry and all of that sort of stuff. And I think that's actually really crucial, because the more I get into this, the more I believe that most of this country really is atheist. The idea of God just means so damn little to them that they haven't even bothered spending time to think about it to get to the place where they can go, oh yeah, I'm an atheist. I mean, I think it's very true. Granted, I'm on the parentheses of America, but I think there's a lot of people for whom that's true. And here's a great example. Mark Maron, I'm sure some of you know him from WTF, a brilliant comedian, and Dana Gould, one of the producers on The Simpsons and one of the best stand-ups working in America today. They're both essentially atheists, but they refused to identify as atheists. So we went around the block a little bit on this. Started out talking about the Defense of Marriage Act, when Dana said, well, the Defense of Marriage Act is not about defending marriage. It's a defense of straight people's privilege. That's what it is. In a lot of straight people's minds, they're shouldering tremendous responsibility, but gay people can have the good parts of marriage without being saddled with biological kids and all that. So why should they get the privileges that come with marriage? What risk do they take? What do they have to put on the line? Dana says, but on the other side of that, and this comes from a homo friend of mine, who said, Jerry and I live together, have been partnered and built a life together for 11 years. Britney Spears goes to Vegas, gets drunk, marries a guy she met that day, and instantly they have more rights than we do. Does that sound fair to you? And I said, no, it doesn't. So if you want a Defense of Marriage Act, make it a Defense of Marriage Act. That means divorce, adultery, and everything that comes along with everything that waters down marriage. What we have here is a gay people shouldn't get what we have act. I said, but of course the debate is all couched in that religious nonsense that pushes that reality right out of the picture. Which brings me to that line of yours, Mark, about religion that I love so much. He said, oh, you mean when I do a Jesus joke that's not quite as bad as the ones I'm about to do? When I say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not here to mock the myths that define any of you? Because I sit there sometimes and I plead with them, you know it's just a story, right? You're believing in a story. I know you really believe it, but there are lots of stories people really believe. I have no patience for Christians who do that. Well, if you believe in Jesus, that's it. There are no conditions, and there's just our one God thing. And even worse, perhaps, are the tolerant ones. Well, I'm just happy you have a faith. And we try to reach out across cultures to other religions because of their devotion to Jesus. But underneath it all, what they're really saying is, but, you know, you're going to hell, right? There's no way you're not going to hell. Dana Gould says, I know enough to know that whatever there is, I don't know it. To me, being a devout atheist is almost as silly as being a devout Christian. Oh, you know exactly what it is because you can't rationalize how it could be true? Because there's no way my dog can comprehend my computer doesn't exist for my dog? And then Mark says, well, atheists are control freaks. Now here I am throwing myself on the grenade for you guys. I said, quite the opposite. God is the attempted control. God is the explanation created to somehow define and structure the mystery and chaos of a world we cannot make sense of. Atheism accepts those mysteries of life rather than just making up or accepting explanations that defy all reason and intellect. I think the idea of a God, frankly, cheapens the wonders of life. Atheism, A meaning without, theism meaning belief in the existence of a God or gods, is simply a state of not believing there is a God. It's not about knowing anything at all. It's just not believing something. It's not a belief itself, and if there's any doctrine, the doctrine is reason, which leads not to the conclusion that there definitely is no God, just to the conclusion that believing there is irrational. Atheists do not claim to know anything more than anyone else knows. We just choose to believe less than others do. Neither of you... Neither of you guys believe in Zeus, or Thor, or Zeno, or Quetzalcoatl, or hundreds of other goals by precisely the exact same reasoning I've chosen to reject, only one more than you've both rejected already. It's kind of like UFOs. I don't believe aliens are visiting us. All the sightings I know of are explainable. It's irrational for me to believe they exist here on Earth. But that does not mean that if there were some rational indication that aliens have come, I wouldn't be the first one to go see them, because how fucking cool would that be? There just isn't any reason I know of for me to believe it yet. Likewise, there is no reasoning that makes it irrational for me to believe that somewhere in this vast universe, the edges of which we can't comprehend, that there aren't aliens who might come visit someday. But we'll never know, because they probably have way better vacation destination alternatives than this shithole. And Dana says, well, you know, my attitude toward UFOs is the same as my attitude towards a woman's orgasm. I'll believe that when I see it. And I said, and by the way, I can prove to your dog that your computer exists. Can you do the same with me for your God? And he says, all I know is I don't know. And I said, well, neither do I. But I won't accept some mythology and some shit somebody made up just because, in place of knowing. Dana says, well, in terms of God or Jesus, that's what I was raised with, so I'm comfortable envisioning the God of my parents' choice, knowing it's just an icon, like a shortcut on my computer's desktop. Like when we had our daughters baptized. My parents were upset. My wife's parents were upset, and I just didn't want to deal with it. I was like, fine. Fine! We'll have a pedophile dunk my kid's head in a bucket so when she dies, she can live in an invisible castle in the sky. Fine. Let's go. What time do I get up? I read the Bible. I know how much Jesus hates kids with dry heads. Well, I said, isn't that an atheist statement? He said, no, I think it's an anti-Catholic statement. I said, an invisible castle in the sky? And he said, an atheist would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, you die, that's it. But I say, maybe I die and I evolve into a higher form of energy, or a being that no three-dimensional plane organism can even comprehend. And I said, well, that's more reasonable to me than an invisible castle in the sky. He said, I think it's silly, but I'll accept that it's possibly true. And I said, reason doesn't make me reject that as a possibility either. It's theoretical. I won't accept that it's true just because it might be. Do you believe everything that you can't disprove? At this point, Mark comes in frustrated and goes, you know, I'm willing to keep the jury open on all of this. If you want to build your life on being the guy doing all the big work, taking the pictures, discerning the text, doing the heavy lifting, great. Send me a memo when you got something conclusive. I'll be more than happy to look at it. But faith without works is dead, right? That's a fucking Jesus thing. Faith without God is possible. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And if you find yourself struggling with existential fear, the only thing God's supposed to do when you're in your darkest moments, basically, is be a big voice that goes, oh, what's the matter, little guy? Everything will be okay. Dana goes, you know what 90% of prayer is? You'll find your flip-flops. There's the fear that the universe is indifferent, which is terrifying to people, and the inability to accept the fact that decency is in fact its own reward. See, I have no fear in my life. That's why I get on planes and travel thousands of miles to get on stage and beg strangers to love me. And then Mark says, and then I don't even believe them. Well, they don't really like me, do they? But it's a very interesting conversation with two very bright people who just really, their only objection was identifying as atheists. And that gave me pause. Let's see. Let me let you guys make some choices here. I got. Oh, here, you'll love this one. Any Janine Garofalo fans here? Yeah. Jeez, I love. Man, she don't take shit from nobody. It's really great. I mean, I've seen her really get into it. It's great. And here's a great example. Wait, what page is that? Wait a minute. 117. Okay. Sorry. Oh, I'm done. Are you guys enjoying this? Must be a no. Here we go. We were talking about the right-left divide. But my premise is that the whole right-left divide, red-blue, red state, blue state, what have you, is really part of the problem. That's all divide and conquer, because the truth is that what we have is 50 purple states, you know? And the whole red-white, the red-blue thing, oh, that sort of left-right, that left-right divide, I find it really sort of part of the problem. So we were talking about that. And I said, the whole left-right, liberal, conservative thing is misleading. It traps people like you in a lot of ways. The truth is most people are in the middle with like a reasonable combination. At the top of the bell curve, most people don't care about gays getting married, but at the same time, they might want smaller government. They might want certain economic conservative principles. Most people are not the extremes on the edges of the bell curve. She said, no, damn it. When I say left and liberal, I stick by it. Without liberals, we got nothing. Without liberals and liberal thinking, we would still own slaves and women wouldn't vote. There's a wonderful tradition in this country of liberals making great strides to bring society forward. Conservatives like the hierarchy the way it is, and they don't want to change it. And when I say right-wing, as it pertains to Ann Coulter and Rush Limbaugh, I mean exactly that. They are right-wing, and their loyalists are extremists. They're the radicals. That's where that word fits. The GOP is a big tent. Yeah, it's a big tent party. All manner of assholes are welcome in the tent. And I said, but we just talked about your dad and that he's a Republican. Is your dad an asshole? She said, politically, a huge asshole. As a grandpa, not really. But he believes in a mythical guy in the sky and doesn't care about people suffering on Earth. He doesn't want to pay taxes for social programs, doesn't want to help out midnight basketball in the inner cities. A lot of Republicans, you see, they get to be the good cop, but the way they vote outs them as the bad cop. You get to pretend to be a nice patriot, but you vote for these assholes who do your dirty work for you. You don't get your hands dirty. So I said it's like subcontracting it out. She goes, that's exactly what it is. You contract out your meanness, your morality, and your lack thereof. Look, you cannot divorce behavioral psychology from voting patterns or from political affiliation. You simply cannot. If you look up liberal in the dictionary, it means tolerant, open, progressive. Conservative means an adherence to tradition. And I would add to that fear of change. There is a reason why Roy Cohn was Roy Cohn. There is a reason that Dick Cheney is who he is. There is a reason that George Bush is the way he is, and that Ann Coulter is the way she is. There is a reason. It is not separate from their political affiliations. You have to be a certain type of person to be that far on the right. The repression, the fear, the guilt, the shame, sex is bad and wrong, I'm a closet queen, whatever. So whenever someone on the right tars me as anti-American, I know I'm not dealing with a serious person, I'm dealing with an infant. When somebody brings up religion with me, same thing. This is how I feel about that. About a year ago, I went to a play on a quasi-date with this guy. We were sitting there waiting for the play to start, and he goes, you know, I've seen you on TV. I have a theory as to why the country seems like it's falling apart right now. I don't think you're going to like it. And I go, uh-oh. What is it? And he goes, I think it all started in the fall. The fall from grace in the Garden of Eden. That's what he said, Garden of Eden. I'm not exaggerating. This is not a joke. This is not a story made up. This is what he said. The fall from grace in the Garden of Eden. I literally climbed over the seats to leave. I will not go on a date and sit next to a person who is 40 years old and talking about the fall from grace in the garden with me, because then I have to question his judgment on absolutely everything. There are not always two sides to every story. Sometimes there is absolute truth, and if you're a walking, talking adult and you're going to bring up Adam and Eve, a fictitious story, a fairy tale, to explain to me why 9/11 happened and why there's terrorism, I'm going to have to climb over every fucking seat to get away from you.
Yes.
It wasn't intended, but one year we had a kind of triple crown of religious anger. All in just one year. We got the Scientologists, the Catholics, I don't know that Scientology really counts as a religion, but Catholics, Scientologists, and from Muslims for the Muhammad episode we did. We wanted to do a Scientology episode for years because it's just so fucking funny. It's just this big funny thing that we were ignoring, and we were ignoring it just because Isaac Hayes, who played Chef, was a Scientologist. So finally we just decided, fuck him. We went after everyone else. Scientology was the only one left. So we did the Scientology episode, and Isaac Hayes and Tom Cruise got really pissed off. They wanted to pick a fight. Tom Cruise decided he would try to get it pulled off the air. Through all of this, Isaac Hayes was really a nice guy. I believe that somebody put him up to try and make us pull the show. When he asked us, there was always some creepy culture stuff going on in the conversation. 3 months later, when the first rerun of the show was scheduled, we got a call from Comedy Central saying, the producers of Mission Impossible 3 would like the show pulled. And we went, Tom Cruise? And they said, the producers of Mission Impossible 3 want the show pulled. We're going to pull it tonight, and you guys can't say anything, all right? And we decided, you know what? We don't have to say anything. The truth of this will come out. And it did in like 6 hours. On the internet, everybody was calling us. The New York Times, CNN, the O'Reilly Factor. There was a temptation to really go to war. Unfortunately, we have to get a show on the air, so we just kind of issued this brief statement. You see, the whole Scientology gig is that you have alien souls attached to your body, and their Satan is named Xenu. I'm not making any of this up. So we put out a press release that simply said, haha, Scientology, alien souls will be attached to your bodies forever, and you cannot save the human race. Hail Xenu. Turned out to be way more effective than starting a fight. Because if you get in a fight, you get into a pissing war with Tom Cruise, and you don't want to be covered in Tom Cruise piss. Because even if you're right, you're on that level of bullshit. And really, I don't know why this makes us proud, but that whole show was basically barely legal. It shouldn't even be legal, but it just barely is. See, Scientology is known for taking people to court, so we had to call Comedy Central's lawyers and run everything by them. And they said, well, if you follow these guidelines, then you can do this. And we did. But see, the way we do South Park is the reason that episode got on the air. Because we do an episode a week. If that show had sat on a shelf at Comedy Central, it never would have made it to air because they would have gotten cold feet. So when we started thinking of that show, I said, we'll have Tom Cruise on it, and we'll make him all super flamboyant. And the lawyers said, no, can't do that. I said, but what if he's really closeted? They said, no, you can't do that. I said, what if he's literally inside a closet? You can do that. See, it's all nuance. We had Stan saying, Scientology is just a pyramid scheme, and they were like, whoa, no, you cannot say that. So we said, well, what if Stan says it's a global scam? And they went, okay, that's good. As long as something is worded just the exact right way, it's okay from a legal standpoint. And to give Comedy Central credit, they were really cool about it. I said, well, aren't you guys a little upset that nobody burnt anything down over your Muhammad cartoon? And they said, you know, the funny thing, we had an episode many years ago called Super Best Friends. And Muhammad was on it as a superhero who, for some reason, I can't recall, turns himself into a beaver. It aired about 7 or 8 years ago, but I turned on the TV one day and I saw Muslims rioting and it just said, Muslims upset over Muhammad cartoon, and I thought, fuck, they just saw it. So I called Matt and I said, this is great, we've got our next episode for sure. We'd already shown Muhammad, so let's do a show about what qualifies as showing Muhammad. Like, the premise we started off from was like, what if I draw a little stick figure with a Chinese hat and say, this is Muhammad? Is that showing Muhammad? This is rife. So we eventually decided to do the South Park boys watching Family Guy, and Muhammad's on that. That way, if any stills of it came out, they'd get blown up, not us. Now, we weren't really being brave at all, really, to be honest. We showed Comedy Central a little clip of Muhammad just standing at the door. No bomb in the turban, nothing offensive at all, just Muhammad standing in the doorway. And they were like, no, no, Muhammad, no, you cannot do this. We said, you do realize that there is an episode from 7 years ago with Muhammad on it, rerunning on your network right now, don't you? And they went, what? They didn't want us to do a show about us showing him, much less actually showing him. But to be fair, no one in America would have done that, and still no one has. No one's had the guts to do even that simplest thing. I said, what was the Catholic controversy? They said, that was our first episode ever to get pulled by the network. Bloody Mary. Stan's father thinks he's alcoholic, turns to God since that's what AA tells you, even though they're supposed to tell you, even though they're not supposed to tell you that, that's basically what AA tells you. There's a Virgin Mary statue in town that's crying blood. Stan's father thinks it's a miracle, maybe the statue can help him. But it turns out the Virgin Mary is actually crying blood out her ass. So the Pope comes to determine if this is really a miracle. Upon closer inspection, the Virgin Mary shits blood all over his face. And the Pope says, this is not a miracle, because she's bleeding out her vagina, and chicks bleed out vaginas all the time. I said, I just love that the Pope calls them chicks. And he goes, some Catholics were upset about it, and for the first time ever, we got the phone call. We're pulling the episode. In 10 years, we've never had an episode pulled, ever. We told Comedy Central, you're setting a very scary precedent here, because if you pull this for the Catholics, then you better pull that for the Jews, this for the Muslims, and for the homosexuals, and then where does it end, you know? We wouldn't have any shows left. Well, the network said, we'll just pull the repeats scheduled for Christmas Eve. And we thought, well, it is Christmas Eve. And the Virgin Mary does shit blood on her home. But for about 2 days we were thinking, here it is, we're being censored, things are changing, they won't let us do what we want to do anymore. Are you anybody here familiar with Vernon Chapman and John Lee? These guys are among the most brilliant satirists working in television. Wonder Shows and was a show of theirs, Xavier and a couple of other things. These guys are hilarious. I couldn't believe they weren't a comedy team. They were so funny together. You just sit down there. Okay, well this is going to take 3. Okay. Wonder Shows basically was a Sesame Street satire. Very heavy issues through the guise of a Sesame Street kind of children's show. And they were talking about some of the issues that they had to deal with there. And I said, it seems like you guys were really courting controversy. And they said, we really didn't get that much, except every once in a while. And we were actually looking for controversy. We wanted press. So we decided, let's do a bit at Ground Zero. And we had a little kid on the show asking, is it okay to laugh again at Ground Zero? The network almost pulled it, but he said, we'll air it if you write an apology beforehand. A pre-apology. We regret this. We take back what we haven't yet done. In advance, we're telling you we're sorry. That's a great way to approach any relationship, right? It's like a comedy prenup. But we wanted to do something because of the comedic challenge. The show was about doing the darkest stuff, so could we take the most horrific thing and somehow be funny with that? We wrestled with it for a long time, but the premise was the answer. Can you laugh at this? We were struggling with it. It was one of the only times that we did a bit about something we ourselves were actually literally struggling with. We both lived real close to Ground Zero. We experienced the whole thing firsthand. It devastated our lives. What happened was something we truly related to and we respected. This was not like making fun of cutesy Care Bears cartoons. This was some real shit. And he goes, and I think people ended up understanding the bit right away too. They understood the question really was, can humor help us deal with this crazy, abstract, emotional thing? We had a little kid dressed up like Hitler asking people, what's wrong with the youth of today? And that only came up because we wrote another bit that we thought would never get through. So we thought, what's the craziest, stupidest, most ridiculous thing that we could do? We'll put that in the script. We'll take that out and they'll let us have the other thing. But they went, oh, okay, can't wait to see the kid in the Hitler outfit. They're like, holy shit, is this even right? Then it became a matter of convincing a kid's parents to let us do it with this kid. Can we convince ourselves that there's actually any actual legitimacy to this whole stupid thing? Well, at least it has a legitimate question. What is wrong with the youth of today? There's nothing I regret in that bit, but I think some people were hurt or offended. But the saddest thing, really, was that some people looked at the kid and went, is that little kid dressed up like somebody? Who's he supposed to be? One guy asked, is he that Korean guy? He's got the mustache, the hair, the armbands, the swastika, everything. He's marching around, his arms sticking up. Some people have no idea. That's like the most disturbing thing about it. I mean, the kid's going, what's wrong with the youth of today? And I'm thinking, what the fuck is wrong with everybody? Like, he's dressed like a Hitler. That's like the #1 bad guy, isn't it? I said, I can't help wondering what the network wouldn't let you do. And they said, well, the censors never saw us. They never met us, and we did some black satire. And they asked us over the phone, is one of you black? And I'm half black, so I said, yeah. And they went, okay, problem solved. Crazy, right? It's the craziest thing about network standards people. If somebody's white, they don't feel comfortable judging what's acceptable to blacks, whether it's okay to say nigger here or there in some context. So they just don't touch it. Here's an idea for you. How about you hire a black person as an executive at your network? And here we go, this is going to wrap it up. They were always sensitive about religious stuff too. That was kind of the biggest thing. We had a little puppet on the cross. And they said, look, you can do God, but you can't do Jesus. And we said, why? And they said, because God is an abstract idea, but Jesus, people will get offended. MTV actually told us, you can make fun of God because God doesn't exist. But you can't make fun of Jesus because he's God's son. Somebody actually said that to us. Please print that. Please print that. I want it on the record. I'm going to say it again so you get it absolutely right, and you promise me that you will print it. Someone at the network said you can make fun of God because he doesn't exist, but you can't make fun of Jesus because he's the Son of God. And I said, I will print that you told me both times that the network said you can make fun of God because he doesn't exist, but you can't make fun of Jesus because he's the Son of God. And then Vern Chapman goes, of course, the big thing now is Muhammad. Whoa, that's the big thing, Mohammed. That's the crazy big thing. You cannot show Muhammad's face. And then the other one says, and that's because the reason Muslims get upset if you show Muhammad's face is because he has a cock for a nose, and it's not even big.